Alright, what's going on everybody? Hope you all are doing good. This video is going to be talking about how to perform and how to do well within the OLT. So let's go ahead and get right into it. One thing that you're going to want to look out for whenever you're in the OLT is a reactive buff. The reason why you're going to want to have a reactive buff or a reactive buff vest on your slot 3 is because you're always going to be taking damage, and since you're always going to be taking damage, this perk has a whatever chance it has. Mine has a 15% chance at taking a damage buff, and that 15% chance can go up or down depending on what your crit chance is, but you're always going to want to have a reactive buff. Now I suggest having a reactive damage buff, and if you look at my stats right now, my perk chance is at a 34%, my crit chance is at a 62%. Now usually my crit chance is at about a 27-28%, but for the people who may not know, the damage buff increases your crit chance, and not only does it boost your crit chance, it's going to boost your damage, because this is what my stats look like without the damage buff. And as you can see, my range stats went down, my melee went down, and my heroic went down as well. And the second thing that you're going to want to have is a ISO of cosmic affinity, and the reason why you're going to want to have this is because you're always taking damage, and you get a 14.3% chance depending on what your crit chance is. It's going to be somewhere around there, somewhere between 13 to 15-16%, that whenever you take damage, this perk will activate, and when it activates, you get willpower and heroic energy back. So this is not only good for recovering your health, but it's also good for recovering your heroics. If you see my heroic recharge rates right now, they are at a 26%, 16, and a 42%. Now most people have at least a heroic recharge rate in all three categories of about a 10%. So I did some testing the other day, and if your assault or your support heroic is at a 16%, which is the lowest I could get mine to, and most people who play this game and have their champion levels, heroic and support rate should be at least at about a 10%. But if it's at a 16%, if you do not have the cosmic ISO of affinity equipped, it takes you 1 minute and 47 seconds to get your assault or support heroic back. Now if you do have this cosmic ISO 8 of affinity equipped, it will take you about 47 seconds to get your assault and support heroic energy back. That's if it's at a 16%. So it's at least a minute difference. So you're going to want to have this so you can have as many ultimates, assault, and support heroics as possible. Now those are the two things that you need to have. So let's go ahead and talk about a few things that you may want to have. One thing that you may want to have is a vibranium payload, because the vibranium deals extra damage to enemies who are fully afflicted with it, and it's a quick and easy way to battery off someone. Another piece that you may want to have is a damage buff in the second slot. Now if you do have a damage buff in the second slot, whether it's on range critical attacks or melee damage buffs, because this faultless buff procs off of melee, don't forget to go back and change this reactive damage buff to something else that you may want. So you may want to have a reactive defensive buff equipped whenever you have a damage buff equipped in your first or second slot. Same thing for these gloves right here, and you get this from the OLT as well. It has a cosmic surge on it as well, so whenever you're dealing damage, you get some willpower and heroic energy back. Now if you do have this piece right here equipped on slot 1, and you can get it equipped on slot 2 as well, be sure to take it off of this minor artifact and equip something that may be more useful to you. Now for slot 3, I don't play with all of the characters, but one thing that you may want to avoid, depending on what character you have, is a piece like this where landing 16 attacks in a rapid succession without taking any damage grants some type of buff, simply because it's a little hard to do 16 attacks consecutively without taking any type of damage whenever you are in the OLT. Now I do run this on Black Widow in the OLT, or a variation of this. Actually it is this one right here, simply because the first two perks are a little too good to pass up on, and it has a high roll of valor and precision. So whenever you fight in the Adaptoid, it just works differently because you're not automatically taking damage anymore. So a few of the things that you want to have on your gear pieces may change. So you have two categories of people who fight the boss. So you have the people who will melt the boss, and you have people who survive the boss. So just know which category you fall into, and I'll be making a template in this video for both categories. So for the people who melt the boss, if you want to be one of those people who melt the boss, one thing that you may want to have is some type of vibranium, because again, it will do that extra damage, and it seems to fill up on enemies a little quicker than some other status effects. I haven't tested it out, but it's very good against the boss. So this is my setup for Widow. Personally, I run a vibranium payload, and I run this damage buff which activates off of melee crits, and I can automatically battery with her batons simply because the batons do shock damage. So that's one thing to look out for. Another piece that you may want to look out for is a piece with a tachyon surge on it as well, because the tachyon surge will give you multiplicative damage, and that's the only other way to get multiplicative damage within the game other than a damage buff. So that's one thing that you may want to look out for. Now, if you don't have a damage buff on your slot 2, which is this one right here, and this damage buff, by the way, procs off of melee crits. This damage buff procs off of range crits. So if you see a faultless buff, it's a melee crit damage buff. But if you don't have one for slot 2 and you're running something else, you could always go over to the heroics section and put on a berserker buff where 16 attacks in a rapid succession will grant a damage buff. And you're going to want to have high valor, high might, high precision, depending on the character in which you're playing with. So for Widow or for someone like Thor, you're definitely going to want to have a lot of valor, because you're going to be doing your heroics on a consistent basis as long as the boss is alive. And another piece that you're going to want to have, it's actually two ways you can go about doing this. You can have on this Sacred Nornstone of Lethal Will, which will give you a damage buff, and this damage buff on the Nornstone of Lethal Will can stack with this damage buff or a damage buff on slot 2. But you can go with this piece right here, or you can actually go with a Tactigon, because it will do damage explosion to enemies who are fully affected with the status. One thing that you do not use this piece, Kamoyo bands. Don't use that piece whenever you are in the OLT, because other people will not be able to use their major artifacts. Now, to be honest, I am not the best builder for taking out bosses solo, but there's someone who is, Jordy. I'll put his link in the description. He soloed the OLT with every single character, so he has multiple builds on multiple characters as well. So if you really want to learn how to defeat a boss really quickly, check out his videos. Now you have the people who may not be able to do the most amount of damage to the boss, but they are very effective in the OLT. And there are ways you can be very effective without dealing much damage, and one way is to have battery damage. So for example, this piece right here has scatter shot with Sonic on it, and it has a vibranium payload, and it has a vibranium double leak on it as well. So if you can deal damage to the boss that has two different status effects, because more than likely you're going to have somebody on your team with some type of shock damage. So if you can put vibranium on the boss as quickly as possible, then definitely go for it. So if you do decide to go this route, make sure that you can actually survive the boss encounter. So look for different types of perks that stack. So for example, I have this perk right here where I gain Quantum Shroud for a brief moment whenever I do a blink dash. And I also have this perk on slot 4 where I get 30% damage absorbed whenever Quantum Shroud is activated. And if I ever have to blink dash, Quantum Shroud will be activated. So that gives me an extra 30% resilience on my build. And another piece that you may want to have is a Cosmic Isolate of Affinity. There are a lot of turrets in the mission, and there are a lot of the OLT Adaptoid clones who hit you with things out of nowhere. So you're definitely going to want to have an Isolate of Affinity. You're also going to want your defense to be high, and whenever I say high, I mean about if you could afford to get away with it depending on your champion level. I have to definitely keep that in mind. You want your willpower, recovery, effectiveness to be at least 160%. And maybe 30% armor. If you can get one of those numbers or both of those numbers, then go for it. And honestly, the willpower is a little bit more important. Actually, it's a lot more important than the resilience. And the reason why the willpower is more important than the resilience is because whenever this Cosmic Isolate of Affinity Reactive Cosmic Surge procs, the amount of health that you gain is based on your willpower, recovery, effectiveness. So if you have less willpower, recovery, effectiveness, you're going to gain less health whenever this perk procs. Not only that, but resilience has a diminishing return. And another thing that you may want to have is a good amount of intensity on your build. Now if you look at mine right now, my stun damage is only a 23%. And sometimes I don't wear these 2 pieces. Sometimes I do, depending on who I'm playing with and how they are going to perform in the mission. But the reason why I can kind of get away with it is because Kate shoots so many arrows, so you have to know your character. Another artifact that you may want to run is this Tactagon as well. You can go for the Norn Stone of Lethal Will, but if you aren't going to be doing a lot of damage and you don't trust your stealth head running it, then I definitely wouldn't run it, because once this damage boost is up, you get no more benefits from it, but you always get this extra 10% or 13% damage to enemies afflicted with a status, and your main job in the OLT is to inflict status effects as much as possible. So you may want to run this instead of the Norn Stone of Lethal Will, especially if you don't have a damage buff equipped within your gear already. So hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.